Mathematics of ESP. Peasant Productions presents the Mathematics of ESP, why it works even if you don't believe in it. Okay. Been discussing the idea of thinking for yourself, why it's important, how to think for yourself, and why it's important. The difference between what a society, a government, a church teaches you is intelligence, and what intelligence really is also very important to understand, okay? It is very common for people to run around and think that because my son can speak 10 languages, my daughter knows 8 languages or 15 languages, okay? Let's stop and look at that for a second, okay? They know 15 languages. What do they do with them all? They know 10 languages. What do they do with them all? Maybe 1% of the people that walk around saying they know all that many languages actually does something with it. 1% becomes translators. 1/10 of 1% or less might become linguists and walk into a forest to go talk with something that nobody knows anything about the language of and try and learn what those people's language actually is. Okay? So 99% of you are literally filling your brains full of something that you will use for vacation, and maybe 2 or 3% of you will get a job as a salesperson, and you will go from one country to another and you will use multiple language, or you will become a teacher and you will teach multiple language, something of that sort. But 90% of the people that walk around, to 95% of the people that walk around saying that they can speak more than 2 or 3 languages, don't do a damn thing with it. So it is not a sign of intelligence, is it? It is a sign of memorization, of filling yourself full of worthless knowledge. It is the same thing as if you learn all the baseball scores or all the football scores for the past 200 years. Or if you learn all of the words and lyrics to all of whoever's songs. Or you watch every, Duck Dynasty TV show. Or you watch every one of those with Real Wives, comedy hour, reality show. Women sitting around gossiping about their hairstyles and their bikinis and their dresses as if there is something intelligent about that. It's a lot of wasted energy. Okay. Now, what is actual raw processing power of intelligence? It's the ability to sit down with a stack of data that it makes no difference whatsoever what that data is. You simply sit down, sort through it, and process it for a needed answer. Okay? I like to, at this point in time, basically point to the fact that my historical record is that I am at least 180 to 200 IQ. That is not a went in and took some psychiatrist test, which if you go and look at those tests, you'll realize that they are geared for whatever society designed them. That is my walking out into the world and actually doing something. Okay. Now, the best example of processing raw data and coming up with a very plausible answer, something that because I'm saying I'm around 200 plus IQ puts me in the Nikola Tesla department. Somebody that can handle just about anything I walk up to. Sure, my language skills suck because I'm dyslexic. But like I just pointed out, so what? A person that can speak a bunch of languages isn't necessarily smart enough to stay out of the way of a moving truck. Okay? I walked in 1983 to my apartment in South Lake Tahoe, and my roommate, Raymond Sanchez, who had spent several years with me conversing both about science fiction and about the possibility of creating a private enterprise in space, knew that I had a bunch of space stations and moon bases and various shuttlecraft and engines for those type of things, and a whole lot of viable data in my head for making a viable business in space. He also knew that we both depended on the space industry kind of keeping its foot on the gas pedal and going somewhere. And he had heard that President Reagan had just announced that he was going to cut most of the funding for NASA. Okay. I walk in, hey, Peter, Reagan just announced that he's going to cut funding for NASA. What are you going to do? What are you going to do about it? Whole sum total of the question, okay? There was no long, lengthy discussion of this at any point in time. I simply looked at him. Okay, damn, that's not a very good thing, is it? Well, let's see, what can I do? Let me think about it. And I walked off. 3 whole days later, folks, I had an answer. Only 3 days. I created the International Space Station. I looked at the Reagan administration, I looked at the government, I looked at society, I looked at the world population problems that were going on, the types of things that were happening. I looked at the history of human beings. Okay? I looked at psychology, physiology, sociology, and what's that other one? Oh man, there's another one, and I can't. The sociology. Yeah, I mean, you name it. I looked at every angle of what was going on, and the philosopher. That's what I'm trying to think. I looked at the philosopher side of it. What could I say that would be so memorable that it would make something happen? Okay. And I sat down and I designed up a letter that was all of 1 page, a single sheet of paper like this. And I made it totally stealable. 100% you're going to steal this idea from me because it is so beautiful and it is so fine and it is so conveniently packaged that you're never going to stop and think about the fact that I actually want you to steal it from me and make this thing happen. 4 months later, the person I addressed that letter to that had absolutely nothing on the outside of it to give away anything about the fact that it came from an activist, nothing to give away the fact that it came from an older person, a person in their 20s. The United States, President Reagan got up and announced that NASA had a new mission. They were going to build a thing called the International Space Station. And he read my letter. He explained about how he didn't read the letter as, oh, this is a letter we have and this is what we're going to do. No. But he read the letter. I had talked about in my letter, very simple, like a little kid would. I want to go into space. Your space shuttle is big enough to carry a school bus. You can send things that big. Why don't you start an international space station and invite all the rest of the countries of the world to be a part of it? Why don't you send the first piece going up and name it Unity to signify the fact that it's for all of the world in a unified international space station for peace and science and goodwill? Okay? You look at the International Space Station. At that time, 4 months later in 1983 still, 7 countries had signed on. 34 years later, 15 countries are continuously directly involved in that International Space Station. There are no guns, there are no bombs, there are no lasers. It is not fake. The CIA and the FBI spend an awful lot of money keeping the flat earth people out there jawing about how the world is flat and NASA is fake, because they realize that it started and built so much momentum that even after the shuttles were retired just yesterday, the Russian Soyuz spacecraft left the space station, carrying down Russian astronauts and other astronauts and having taken supplies up. The news today, of course, is that Russia and the United States are the bitter enemies, and it's in the middle of the Cold War, and we're shooting and getting ready to shoot and kill each other, and we're going to go to war in Syria, and we're going to go to war in North Korea. Yeah. And at the same point in time, my international peace object, worth well over $1 trillion in funds into the human race, is up there overhead, scooting along, showing that human beings can work together in peace. They don't have to shoot anybody. They don't have to kill anybody. They don't have to laser beam anybody. They don't have to have Mexican knife fights. They don't have to do a bloody thing about killing each other. Okay? And I did that all with a single sheet of paper. That is what intelligence is. I looked that far in advance of what I wanted to accomplish, who and how I needed to make it happen, what I needed to do, because I knew if I had a bunch of countries involved, no one would trust the other country enough to let anybody take a frickin' bomb up there. Put a frickin' laser beam up there. Put any kind of energy weapon on it. Do anything of any kind of militaristic attitude other than possibly run some kind of, we're on some plants here and we're trying to do genetic modification or something like that. That is the most they would ever get away with. Has there ever been any knife fights up there? Have you even heard of one of those women up there slapping one of the other guys for grabbing her? Now, it may have happened. Okay. It may have happened. But you don't hear about any kind of violent attacks, violent behavior. 99% of every astronaut that comes down has always spoken about how looking down at that planet down there below us and seeing that there are no walls, there are no fences, there are no dotted lines painted around countries, made it realize that we had one planet and we needed to all work together. That is intelligence, folks. That is what thinking for yourself is capable of producing. Whether you are a bizarrely super intelligent person like me, or you are an average intelligent person who can sit down and actually look at the facts and realize their government is lying to them, and if they don't get up off their butt, nothing's going to change. Okay? So that's why it's important to learn to think for yourself, and to learn how to think, and to not let anybody tell you that the best thing to do is to have censorship and not let you see fake news. Because fake news is the first thing that they do. Like I said, flat Earth does not really exist, but it is very good at walking around and getting all over the place and telling you NASA is fake. Why? Because CIA and FBI and the United States government don't really want you to realize that if we get out there in space, we might have had a chance of saving the planet.